My name's Cam Day. I'm a full-time pet behaviour veterinarian here in Brisbane. Have a lot of fun dealing with cats and dogs. Kim gave me the job of talking about the rise and fall of pedigree cats. I think she has a vested interest in cats for whatever reason. But I too have an interest in the breed, not deed, deed, not breed concept. And because we operate a database which sucks information from the internet, which drives my business, we accumulate a fair bit of data about dogs and cats, and that's the paper on which this was based. Albeit the name of the title, the name of the presentation is The Rise and Fall of Pedigree Cats. This has been accepted for publication in the Journal of Veterinary Behaviour. My role here was just to provide the data to people of much higher intellect than me. I'm not by any means a statistician, so John Morton did all the statistics, Jackie Rand and Clive Phillips were major drivers of the information, and also Isabel Johnson, a veterinarian, helped us with some of the cat stuff as well. So it's been accepted for publication. We have a little bit less than 20 minutes to get through this because we started late, so I'll have to go quickly. But basically, we identified risk factors for behaviour problems in domestic cats, with the concept of trying to work out what breeds of cats are more overrepresented for what type of behavioural problem. We dealt with 1,556 individual cat records that are in our database. And these were owners who reported their cat's behavioural problems. We looked at the breed, the sex, the age, the owner's postcodes, and their work routine were also recorded through the nature of the database we run. And from there, Agnes, who did the work, worked out risk factors that were determined from proportional morbidities for the behaviour problem for each cat was reported as having. More will become obvious. Materials and methods, just doing this quickly. We did a retrospective evaluation of 1,556 cats. The data was collected in our database from 2001 up to 2013. And the source of the data was mainly twofold. It was from people who contacted us to say, can you help me with my cat by phone? And we would create a database record where myself or my staff would input various fields, mostly from drop-down lists. And the drop-down list, the idea of that is it keeps things in their little groups. Or a lot of people, and probably about 70% I would say, filled in a questionnaire online. And that questionnaire feeds directly into exactly the same database. In either case, whether they did it online or they spoke to us, somebody would eventually speak to them, and particularly if they made a consultation, of course, we would make sure that the data was there. About 43% of our cases are referred to us by veterinarians. So the data we collected are based on the cat details, with the breed, the sex, whether they're desexed or otherwise, and their date of birth, the number of cats in the household and other pets as well, and whether they were house confined or free to roam. From the purpose of the owner's details, we determined the location and postcode because we're interested in the socio-economic effects of cat ownership and behavioural problems. We looked at their work routine, whether they're working 60 hours a week or were at home most of the time, and also the number of people in the home, adults and children. From the purpose of the behaviour of the cats, the owners could specify on the form at least up to 3 levels of behavioural issues. Priority 1 generally was their most important priority, priority 2 and priority 3 going down the list of priorities. And online at least on the form they could enter more data into a free text field. Some people add war and peace essays in that, which takes ages to go through. Other people just put a line or two. This is just a glimpse of our database. This is a real record, but I've just changed the name so you can't identify the client. But because of the nature of this, it's a shame the pointer doesn't work, isn't it? Up above here are all the owner details. So we have suburb, which is a drop-down list. Suburb appears here, so we can do suburb analysis. The name of the cat, which is relevant statistically, comes in here. We can put 2 cats in this group and other cats will appear down here. The breed appears in here. A lot of data in this presentation came from the breed, whether it was desexed or not, the age of the cat, when they got it, number of people in the home, the work routine, whether it was inside or outside, and this field here is a free text field which we will put information into, or the owner will online, so this becomes quite important. So that's just a glimpse of our database. In the database we have 20,000, approaching almost 21,000 records. Not all of those are pet owners. We have about 12,500 dog owners and somewhere about 4,500 to 5,000 cat owners, or thereby cats. So that's the kind of data we've accumulated over the years. Now the postcode areas were assessed using something called the Index of Relative Socioeconomic Advantage and Disadvantage. Simply that a low score with that indicates that that person has relatively greater disadvantage and a lack of advantage, and a high score indicates a relative lack of disadvantage and a great advantage. So these people will be the Daewoo drivers, and these will be the Volvo drivers or the Porsche drivers, kind of trying to put it in that sense to some extent. When it comes to the behaviours of the cats, the behaviours, because there's a drop-down list, were already partly segmented, if you like, but when we spoke to the clients, and each one would have had some form of conversation, mostly we would have formalised what that is. Now these words are not diagnosis, they're not diagnostic. It's not me coming back at the end and saying, well, the diagnosis was aggression or assimilation or attention seeking. It was basically what the owners said worried them about their cat's behaviour, particularly when we gave them a choice of things to pick on the form on the website. So they're the range of behaviours which Agnes, the person who wrote the paper, assessed for us. When it comes to breed types, now this was a particular point of brilliance, I think, that Clive and Jackie and Agnes and John Morton decided on. They thought that rather than trying to work out how different a Persian's behaviour is from a Raggy or from a Maine Coon, or how different is a Siamese from a Balinese, they used the Australian Cat Federation existing groups, Group 1, 2, 3 and 4, on the presumption, I gather, that the Australian Cat Federation knows more about cat types than you and I do. So therefore we have Persians, Rags and Maine Coons, etc., basically the long hairs in Group 1, the short hairs such as the Siamese and Balinese, etc. in Group 2, Group 3 being the Australian Mr. Bengals, goddamn them, and the Burmese, and Group 4 being the domestics, the Moggies, the domestic short hair, domestic medium hair, domestic long hair. So I thought that was quite clever, because rather than trying to work out why a Persian's behaviour is different to a rag doll, we had these quite big divisions, which makes the statistics, I gather, a lot easier to analyse. With regards to the population statistics, it's all very well saying that Persians, for instance, may be worse house soilers than Bengals are, and that's not necessarily what I'm saying, because I can't remember if that's true or otherwise. But then you're comparing the within group. In other words, of all the badly behaviour cats, which ones were the worst sprayers, or the worst ones with pica, or the worst ones with oral compulsions. So the other part of the data was to say, well, we need to know how bad an individual cat is compared to the cat population of the catchment area, which in this case was the Gold Coast. The Gold Coast City Council were really good because they gave us their registration database from 2014. At this stage, registration was compulsory on the Gold Coast, so we had almost 14,000 cat records to look at where we could identify breeds, postcode locations. So the latter part of the study was to try and determine what really are the cats which are overrepresented in the behaviour group compared to their commonality in the cat-owned population. So that was a useful thing to do, and you'll see that towards the end of the presentation. So breed effects were assessed by comparing the number of cats in each breed in our group study with the breeds of registered cats sieved from the Gold Coast City Council into the 4 same groups. So what were the results? Now, it's dealing with the most basic stuff. When it comes to the groups of cats, the Persians, the Rags, the Maine Coons were about 16% of the study group, Siamese Balinese 7%, Australian Miss and Bengals 25%, and as you would expect, the companions, the domestic short hairs, medium hairs, 52%. So this is what you would typically call your crossbred group. The rest of them are supposed to be purebreds. Just a definition of breed, if a client said the cat was a Persian cross Bengal, I wonder what that would look like, then we took the first cat breed as being the main breed indicator of what that cat was. So as you would expect, the companion cats made up a big slob of this information. The age was a little bit interesting. The cats under 12 months were 15%, 1 to 2 years 13%, a big 7-year span for the 2 to 9 year old cats, which was 58%, and older cats were 14%. I found it a bit interesting that when we said less than 12 months of age, we wouldn't have a cat, I doubt, under 2 months of age in our database, and thinking about it, more likely they would be older than that. So there's quite a big slog of cats, young cats, under 12 months of age there. That to me was quite significant when I had a look at that. And quite a number of cats over 9 years of age, indicating cognitive issues maybe in older cats, perhaps. Work hours. Work hours was interesting. In other words, of the badly behaved group, does your work routine affect the behaviour of the cats? If If you look at the first two groups, 62% of the clients were working a traditional 20 to 60 hour week. People doing the grindstone of leaving at 7 a.m, coming home at 6 p.m. The mostly home people, so probably the retirees or people who are out of work, 18%, and shift work about 20%, indicating a little bit perhaps that those who work long hours have more behavioural problems with cats than those who work short hours, perhaps. Socioeconomics, the Daewoo drivers are less than 1,000. I shouldn't say anything about Daewoo, should I? It's really politically incorrect. But the people who have lower socioeconomic scores of 24%, mid-range people 23, 28%, and the higher advantage people 25%. Not too much difference there really. Now when it comes to the behaviours that concern cat owners, this is when it gets a little bit interesting. If you're just looking at the behaviour group and putting the most common at the top, house oiling with urine, subset in other words without faeces, is 25%. Aggression to familiar people 13%, and they go down in rank. Aggression between familiar cats 8%, anxious, fearful 8%, vocalising 6%, and house soiling with urine and faeces 6%. Turn the statistics around another way. House soiling and aggression, 33% each for each of those. 66% of the cases, more than half, are just two basic big behaviour groups. Which means if you want to become a cat behaviourist, you've only got to be an expert in cat house soiling and aggression, and you can make a fortune out of cat behaviour. That should give you stimulation for doing stuff if you wish. Now, proportional morbidities, this helps us to answer which cat breed is the worst. And this is where I thought they did some interesting things. Now, bear in mind, I'm not a statistician, but what they did here is with the within group behaviour, so not comparing them with the group population, but if you look at all of the badly behaved cats, they rank the cats on high and low compared to a reference group. And the first reference group they decided to use was the group 4 cats, which are the moggies, the domestic short hairs, medium hairs, long hairs. They used them as a reference group, particularly because they're more than half of the group anyway. And then what they did, they ranked each of the group 1, 2 and 3 to say whether they're higher or lower represented than the actual reference group. For instance, group 1, the ragdolls, the Persians, the Maine Coons, rank more lowly for aggression between cats than your standard domestic moggie. But they rank more highly for house soiling with urine only and house soiling with urine and faeces. We get a bit more clarity on this as we go through. Group 2 kind of were highly represented for house soiling with urine, and group 3 were not highly represented for aggression to familiar people or unfamiliar people, but were highly represented for pica and oral compulsions. I found that pica and oral compulsions interesting because I personally see a lot of Burmese who eat hair ties, strings, ribbons, tassels on furniture, and I'm sure the rest of you would as well. So I'm sure the Bengals are driving that. When it comes to age, they use the young cats as the reference group and compared the rest of the age population with the young cats. They found that young adults, 1 to 2 years of age, were more likely to be aggressive to unfamiliar cats, so they would be typically a cat roaming around the garden of the owner. The 2 to 9-year-old cats were less represented for aggression to unfamiliar cats and aggression to familiar, were more represented for aggression to unfamiliar cats and aggression to familiar cats, but less so for house soiling with faeces only, house soiling with urine and faeces, and aggression to familiar people. And the older cats were more represented for excessive vocalising and less for oral behaviours. More for excessive vocalising, yeah, I think we tend to see that more in aged cats, and maybe that's a sign of cognitive decline. The sex and neuter status, the female de-sex with a reference group. We, by the way, had very, very few, almost probably 0 non-de-sex cats in our database. People who come to me have already de-sexed their cats. So because we're dealing with a different population than the standard population out there on the street. So entire animals don't really feature in this. But we have the males are more likely to vocalise and more likely to soil with urine only. They're less likely to be aggressive between familiar cats and less likely to overgroom or self-harm, which means female cats are really bitchy. That's the summary of that, of course. Interestingly enough, there was no significant association with socioeconomics. So the people who are more disadvantaged socioeconomically or more highly advantaged, there wasn't any behaviour difference, which I thought was quite interesting. Similarly, the work routine actually didn't have any statistical difference either, and I found that quite surprising. Asked that of dog owners, and I'm sure the work routine would be quite dramatic. However, we need to remember that for some reason, 74% of the cat owners didn't report on their work schedule. That kind of surprised me when I read the paper, because I thought we had more people specifying their work schedule than appears there, but I didn't get a chance to look into it. Now, this is where things get a bit more interesting, and this is awful at the moment, but it'll become better as I work with it. What really interests me is comparing the problem behaviour cats with the cat population that they are pulled from. So this is the cats out there in the moment in the Gold Coast. And this will be better when I start working with it. But here, the first thing you have to notice is that the moggies, the domestic short hairs, the domestic medium hairs, the standard hybrid vigor crossbred cat is gorgeous. All purebred cats are disastrous. And that just really surprised me. Well, I suppose it didn't surprise me, but I found it really interesting.
Do this.
Yeah, exactly. So that's really, really fascinating. Then if you're giving advice to your clients on what cat should they get to not have behaviour problems, for God's sake, stay away from the purebred cats. Question is, why is that so? Interesting. I looked at that and I checked it and I checked it and I checked it and I checked what Agnes did, and that's it. It's there. That's what I present to you. I thought that was interesting. We can pick more details out of this though. So which cats are bad? There's something missing there. Oh, that's right, yeah. Now, if you look at it the other way, the group 3 cats, the Bengals, the Burmese and the Australian Miss and like ones, they are more represented by the slab of behaviours where they're more highly represented than the long-haired groups. So short-haired cats, including the Bengal, how about that, have a lot of behavioural problems. Now we can look at individual behaviours. Now, the cat that ranks most highly with soiling with urine and faeces is the long-haired group. So group 1s are the poopers and peers of the world. The cats which do more over-grooming and self-harming are the short hairs, the Siamese and the Balinese. The cats which are highly represented for spraying are the short hairs, the Siamese and Balinese, and also the group 3s, including the Bengal and the Burmese. Pika is in the Australian Miss, the Bengal and the Burmese, and I'm sure it's the Burmese are pushing that. Everybody else seen Burmese with oral compulsions? Must be really common, dangerous ones. Enterotomies with hair ties in the gut. And roaming and escaping is more represented in group 3 than any other group. So quick summary, how am I going for time? Is that householding and aggression are the most commonly reported concerns of your clients who ask for referrals. Purebred cats show more behavioural problems than companion cats. Older cats show increased tolerance of familiar people, but reduced tolerance of other cats. And males were more likely to present with excessive vocalisation, householding with urine, and less likely to present with aggression between familiar cats.